Well, thank you so much, John, and let's give John a round of applause. He's really been the brains behind all of this. John, thank you very, very much for all you did. Well, when I asked John, what should I speak about, he said about 13 minutes, so I will try to stay within my time as I hopefully open this keynote here for this wonderful conference. But let me just say welcome first on behalf of all of my colleagues at JPMorgan Chase to our Global Conference Center here in New York. We're thrilled that you all could be here, and I know many of my colleagues are here in the room, and I won't take time to introduce them, but one colleague who's been really responsible for our partnership with John and AABDC is Joyce Chang, who is one of our most senior global women who heads up all of our global equity research. And I know she's traveling today, but I just wanted to make sure I gave her a shout out because she's responsible for our longstanding partnership with John and the organization. Well, the theme of my opening remarks today is time's up. The time is now. And as we think about the subject of this conference, diversity and inclusion, I really think about all of the things that have been happening recently, whether it's the crusade of the 300 Hollywood women that we've seen recently, or the millions of women who marched across the world, literally, in the last couple of weeks. The refrain is really still the same. The call to action is for a truly just, equitable, and inclusive society. One that embraces and respects not just women, but certainly all people of color, and really all people of all backgrounds at all levels. So I'm really heartened to see in this audience today, and thank you all for attending, are men and women, and as was pointed out, people of all ethnicities. Certainly we have folks of all ages, including mature folks like myself, so thank you for that. And I think really just all of us here who really understand the importance of this subject. So I think many of us in this room with our backgrounds can probably say that, you know, we can acknowledge our immigrant background. We probably go back maybe no more than 3 generations, maybe a little bit more. But we certainly understand more than anyone about what our country looks like today and really the need for the inclusionary tone that we need to continue to raise in our country. So as John said, and we know the theme of this conference is the new majority is the new normal for business. We all know it's smart business. We all know it's important to have inclusive decision-making tables that give everyone a voice, whether it's the boardrooms in which I and you all sit, or whether it's the management tables on which we sit. But the fact is, folks, we're still not there. I'm very disappointed as I stand up here before you today to say to you, if we just look at board statistics, boards of directors in our country, of Fortune 500 companies, the statistics to me are not good. First of all, people of color, depending on which ethnicity, generally less than 7% total seats go to people of color still today in our country. If we look at women, again, if we talk about gender equity, we are not there at about 20%. And those percentages are not moving very fast, by the way, if we take account of all directors and of the seats that are coming open. So I think what we would say and what I would say is time's up. Time's up, enough talk, we need to move into action. So before I delve into a couple takeaways that I want to leave you as thoughts for this conference, let me give you just a few insights into my personal background. John did a great job of talking about lots of things, but many of you don't know that. My family, I'm from Spokane, Washington originally. How we got there was a set of unfortunate circumstances. Many of you are aware that Japanese Americans were interned in camps during World War II. And really, my father, my grandfather, they were Americans. But the fact of the matter is the hysteria around the war caused Japanese Americans to be taken forcibly off the West Coast and put into internment camps. And so my father, his older brother, got him out in time to Spokane, Washington to get a high school education while the rest of the family literally got put into these camps. But my father, what I remember about him the most is that in spite of all of this adversity, what I remember above all was he was a patriot, he was a loyalist, he was persistent, he was resilient, and he decided he would enroll in the U.S. Army after high school graduation. And he and many other Japanese Americans who wanted to prove their loyalty to this country literally became part of what was called the 442nd Fighting Battalion, which became one of the most decorated units for the United States Army during World War II. And so as I really think about that, I think about what he left with me was this real sense of resilience, of really making sure that, you know, in spite of what happens to you and your family and other circumstances, that you really look at loyalty and look at how you can give back and make a difference in the community. So, you know, that kind of set the tone, I suppose. We all have a story in this room, and I do too, about my first job, fighting for my first job, trying to convince folks out of business school that I deserved to have a break, to have my first job, that I deserved promotions that I knew I was qualified for, but was told no. And so, you know, I'm not going to go into detail about all of those because we all have those experiences. And I think they tend to shape us. But what shaped me most were the mentors and sponsors that I had, who were so instrumental in giving me that break when somebody told me, no, you're not qualified. No, we can't have a minority manager in that community. And for all those instances in my career, I was so fortunate that some mentor, some sponsor said, you know what, we need to give her a chance. So I am deeply grateful for that. And as I think about those mentors and sponsors, I think about the fact that they knew in their soul, even though we didn't call it diversity and inclusion back then, they knew that that was the right thing in their soul. Because I remember my first CEO, and this was, say, 20-some years ago, who sat at the table when I was there, and he said, you know, Phyllis, why is Phyllis the only person of color at this table helping us make decisions? Because more than half of our customer base are women, because increasing percentages of our customer base are people of color. We're not very smart, are we? We're not making decisions that look like our customer and employee base. So I really do always remember that, and that was 20 years ago, and we're still talking about it today, but we need to make sure that our obligation is that we really think about what can we do to make sure that we have a business that's smart, that looks like our customers and employee bases. The other thing I tell you about diversity and inclusion, is I've sat at board tables for over 30 years, is that better decisions get made with more diverse teams. And we all know that, and we see that, but it's still, I think, something that we need to continue to talk about. Why is diversity and inclusion important and the new normal for business? So as we think about the 5 takeaways I want to leave you today, I really just want you to think about the fact that let's all use this conference to really rethink our own roles as leaders and our own voices, no matter where we sit. Because the formation of this alliance, I think, is a fantastic start. It, as everybody says, looks across all different groups, all different ages, all different, really, walks of life and professions. And this, to me, is really just the magic in how we're going to get movement in these issues. So the 5 takeaways are this, and I'll just go through them quickly. Takeaway 1, be an advocate for an inclusive culture. Now that sounds obvious. I know we're all preaching to the choir in here, but whether we're the CEO or not, we all have a role to play in talking about the real need for a diverse and inclusive culture. You know, we're very fortunate at JPMorgan Chase. Jamie Dimon, our leader, gets this, drives this. It really is part of our, you know, what I would say our cornerstone of how we do business. But I think the important thing is not just the tone at the top. The important thing is what's called the mood at the middle. I think that's, Deb, that's your expression, and the buzz at the bottom. And so I think part of it is, what are we doing to really, at all levels of the organization, to make sure that really diversity and inclusion is real, that we speak for it, that we are an advocate, and that really we make sure that we're practicing it at all levels. And one example would be, you know, ensuring that wherever we are, that we insist upon a diverse slate of candidates for every open position. It sounds really simple, but sometimes it's not easy to do. So takeaway 2, be a voice for what is right. Now, I can't say enough about that because sometimes it's lonely. I will say that, and I think we've all been there. Because we're diverse, we see things differently, we view things through a little different lens. But even though something goes against the prevailing opinions in the room, it's really, really important. That's why we're there as diverse folks, to speak up, to speak out, to really frame the right questions that need to be asked. And I think especially in boardrooms today, that's more critical than ever. And so I think I could go through a lot of examples, but I think there's lots of cases of unconscious bias. There's lots of things that we observe that we say, that's just not right, or that just doesn't add up, or I want to know more about how you came to that conclusion. So questions like that we ask really are that voice, the voice for what's right and from our points of view, and it's important to voice that. Takeaway 3, it's an obvious one, but I just want to make sure we think about that in the next day and a half, and that's be a mentor and supporter. And I think really that's why I love this alliance, is that we're really all together in this journey. And each of us has a role to play in paying it forward. And as I mentioned in my own story, but for the mentors, but for the sponsors, but for the folks that really were part of my life, I would not be up here today. So it's an obligation, as my father would have said to me, to be a mentor to others and to really give back wherever you can. And I think the message of this conference and the alliance is when we stand together, we are much stronger. So each of us has an opportunity to be an advocate or to be a voice or to be a mentor. We just need to embrace that. Takeaway 4, step up, raise your hand, and step into taking risks. And I think I would just say to you, as a person of color, as a female in the business world for most of my career, I go through the same doubts that everybody goes through. Am I good enough? Do I belong here? What if I fail? All those questions, I think, are questions that really, I think, are voices that I've heard my whole life. And, I just say to you, it took a lot of not just the mentors and sponsors, but just self-talk to say, you know what, you're going to learn a lot, you're going to stumble, but you need to take the risk. You need to jump into something that looks challenging and looks like a stretch, because that's really the only way there's going to be personal growth. So I know that AABDC and other organizations represented in this room are encouraging all of us to really step out and take those risks. But, in order to have the voice, we need to be in those leadership positions to be able to be more effective in all of the things we're talking about. And last but not least, takeaway 5 is ensure that we are advocates for those being left behind. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this obligation, because I know in particularly today's world, we see so many, as we see minority groups becoming the new majority, we all know that all folks are not being lifted up economically. And so I hope that each of us, as we think about our roles as leaders, continues to be a strong voice for true inclusionary economic and really just true inclusionary equity and a culture that says economically we all need to make sure that we prosper. So the 5 takeaways in sum, as you think about this conference, are: number 1, be an advocate for an inclusive culture, especially at the tables in which you sit. Number 2, be a voice for what is right. Number 3, be a mentor and supporter. Number 4, step up, take risks, raise your own hand. And last but not least, be an advocate for those who are being left behind. So we're at a unique time in our country's history, a time when the new majorities are emerging and flexing our impact. But we're also in times where there's resistance in some parts of the political and, I think, demographic spectrums to some of these changes. And a time when many are being left behind in the social and economic inclusion scale. Yet it's a time when there are emerging movements to bolster the voices of justice, equality, and inclusiveness. So we need to join in that chorus of voices, stand together to truly support each other so that we can all make a difference together. So let us commit to be a part of the positive change so that our companies will be more successful, our communities will thrive, and our nation will be much stronger. The time is now. So thank you very much and enjoy the conference.